He was the king of soul, a civil rights icon, and a music mogul before the world was ready for one. But while others were celebrated, Sam Cooke was erased, his influence buried, his death brushed aside. Shot dead under mysterious circumstances, his voice was silenced at just 33. Why don't we honor him like we do the others? Why is his name not carried in the same breath as Elvis, the Beatles, or Michael Jackson, when his artistry changed the very fabric of American music? This is Celebrity Underrated, the Sam Cooke story. Born in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and raised in Chicago during the era of segregation, Sam's journey was never just about music. From church pews to street corners alive with gospel quartets, he carried with him the voice of a generation. His sound wasn't merely heard, it was felt, like silk that could lift you in prayer or whisper to your soul. But behind the glory lay restlessness. Sam questioned the rules no one dared to challenge. Why couldn't a gospel singer sing of love? Why couldn't a black man own his art? Why did salvation have to stop at the pulpit? Those questions would define his path, lift him to unthinkable heights, and ultimately place him in the crosshairs of a world not. What follows is not just the tale of a singer. It's the story of a man who broke barriers, who carried the hopes of millions, and who left behind a song so haunting it outlived him and became the anthem of a movement. This is the story of Sam Cooke, a voice never meant to fade. Sam Cooke's story begins not just with a date of birth, but with a place steeped in contradiction. He was born on the 22nd of January 1931 in Clarksdale, Mississippi, a small town where the blues soaked the soil and the harsh weight of Jim Crow pressed down on every black family. Clarksdale was music and misery intertwined. It was a place where spiritual hymns drifted from wooden churches, while the laws of segregation reminded every child exactly where they could and could not walk. Into this world, Sam arrived as the fifth of 8 children, a middle child in a household defined by faith and discipline. His father, Reverend Charles Cooke, was a Baptist minister, stern yet compassionate, a man who believed that Scripture was not just recited but lived. His mother, Annie Mae, was the quiet strength of the family, steady and unshaken, grounding her children through prayer and resilience. Faith was not optional in the Cooke household, it was the very foundation of their existence. Every Sunday, the family filled church pews, and every weekday, the Reverend reminded his children that God's word would carry them through the storms of life. But faith alone could not shield them from the grinding limitations of the segregated South. By the early 1932, millions of black families were restless, tired of being told where they could live, work, and hope. Sam's parents were among them. When Sam was just 2 years old, they joined the Great Migration, packing up what little they had and heading north to Chicago in search of opportunity and dignity. It was a journey that thousands of families took, a leap toward the unknown in hopes of escaping the constant reminders of second-class citizenship. Chicago was a different world. The winters were harsher, the streets noisier, the pace fast. Yet for a family looking to carve out a better life, the city offered something Mississippi never could, a chance. The Cookes settled in Bronzeville, a vibrant black neighborhood alive with ambition. Bronzeville pulsed with energy jazz clubs humming late into the night, political thinkers debating in smoky rooms, gospel quartets harmonizing on every corner. Here, the young Sam grew up surrounded by the clash of sacred and secular sounds. A child, it didn't take long for his gift to show. As a boy, Sam sang in a family gospel group called the Singing Children. Even then, it was clear he wasn't just another kid in the choir. His voice had control and tone beyond his years. It could soar with the intensity of a sermon and then drop into a whisper that seemed to hold secrets. Teachers, neighbors, and churchgoers alike recognized that this child was different. In high school, he joined the Highway QCs, a teenage gospel group that served as a training ground for ambitious young vocalists. On that stage, Sam began shaping the style that would later transform American music. Unlike many gospel singers of the time who relied on raw shouts and fiery delivery, Sam brought smoothness. His voice didn't scream salvation. He could pour emotion into a phrase without ever losing composure, a style that separated him from his peers and hinted at his future as a crossover star. But with talent came tension. Sam loved the Lord, but he also loved the velvet tones of Nat King Cole. He admired the church, but but he was fascinated by the world beyond its walls. Inside him, a conflict brewed: duty versus desire, tradition versus transformation. He began to ask questions others whispered but never voiced aloud. Why couldn't a gospel singer also sing love songs? Why couldn't a black man own his art instead of surrendering it to white executives? Why did salvation have to end at the pulpit when his voice could reach far beyond? These questions weren't just idle thoughts. They reflected the restless spirit of a young man unwilling to be confined by rules written before his time. Already as a teenager, Sam Cooke wasn't walking the same path as those before him, he was carving his own. That defiance, that bold curiosity, would propel him toward greatness, but it would also place him squarely in the crosshairs of those who feared what he represented. The boy from Clarksdale had become the prodigy of Brunsville, and the gospel world was beginning to take notice. But Sam's eyes were already fixed on horizons that stretched far beyond the church steps. By 1950, at just 19 years old, Sam Cooke received the call that would alter the course of it. The Soul Stirrers, one of the most respected gospel quartets in America, had just lost their legendary lead singer, R.H. Harris. Known for their tight harmonies and electrifying energy, the Soul Stirrers were gospel royalty. To join them was to step into a sacred lineage, a spotlight that many seasoned singers would have hesitated to enter. But Sam, still barely out of his teenage years, accepted the challenge. At first, skeptics wondered if the young newcomer could fill such large shoes. Harris had been fire and brimstone, a voice that shook rafters and moved congregations to tears. Sam was different, softer, smoother, almost disarmingly tender, but the doubts evaporated the moment he opened his mouth. His voice glided like oil on water, fluid, reflective, impossible to ignore. He could hit every note with precision, but it was the emotion behind those notes that left audiences spellbound. With Sam as lead, the Soul Stirrers didn't merely continue, they transformed. Songs such as Jesus Gave Me Water, Peace in the Valley, and Touch the Hem of His Garment captured not just faith but longing, intimacy, and romance. For the first time, young women who had never shown much interest in gospel music were buying records and attending concerts just to hear him sing. Sam had made gospel cool, reshaping its sound and expanding its audience in ways few thought possible. But with success came controversy. To the more conservative corners of the gospel community, Sam's voice was too worldly, too seductive, too much like the love songs playing on the radio. There were whispers in the pews. Was this still church music, or was it pop disguised as gospel? Some accused him of blurring the sacred with the profane, of tempting listeners with the flesh while pretending to sing of the Spirit. Sam wasn't trying to corrupt gospel. He was trying to expand. He believed that God didn't always speak in shouts. Sometimes he whispered. And Sam's voice, gentle yet commanding, embodied that truth. But behind the scenes, the tension between tradition and innovation grew harder to ignore. At the same time, Sam's ambition was reaching beyond Sunday services. While the Soul Stirrers toured, he was quietly studying the business of music contracts, publishing rights, the fine print that most artists ignored until it was too late. He noticed how white executives controlled the money while black voices did the singing. He realized the system was designed to exploit artists like him, and he began to wonder how he could beat it. It was during this period that Sam tested the waters of secular music. Using the pseudonym Dale Cook, he recorded love songs in secret, hoping to shield his gospel reputation from backlash. But that voice was too distinct, too unmistakable. Fans recognized it immediately. The reaction was swift and brutal. Gospel stations stopped playing the Soul Stirrers. Promoters canceled shows. To many in the church, Sam's double life was unforgivable. Yet Sam saw it differently. He loved gospel, but he also loved Nat King Cole. He loved the church, but he longed for the freedom to tell stories of love, longing, and everyday life. Gospel had been good to him, but it couldn't pay what pop music could. It couldn't reach the wide audiences he dreamed of, and it couldn't contain the restless creativity brewing inside him. In 1957, after 7 transformative years with the Soul Stirrers, Sam made the hardest and most important decision of his young life. He left gospel behind and stepped into the uncertain world of secular music. It was a gamble that risked his reputation, friendships, and fan base. Many saw it as betrayal, but Sam wasn't chasing acceptance, he was chasing legacy. He didn't want to be remembered only as a gifted gospel singer. He wanted to be the voice of a generation, to redefine what black artistry could mean in America. The leap from pulpit to pop was perilous, but Sam had never been afraid of questions that others dared not ask. Now he was ready to answer them, with melodies that would reach far beyond the church walls and into the heart of a nation. The gospel prodigy had taken his final bow in the sanctuary. The stage of popular music was waiting, and Sam Cooke was prepared to change it forever. The year was 1957, and America was trembling with change. The civil rights movement was gaining momentum, demanding visibility, dignity, and power for black citizens long denied their humanity. Into that atmosphere of urgency and hope stepped Sam Cooke, not as a gospel prodigy anymore, but as a man ready to gamble everything on a dream larger than himself. He had left behind the safety of the soul stirrers and the gospel world that had nurtured him since boyhood. In its place, he carried little more than a new record deal with Keen Records, a small independent label, and a song that would become his passport into history. The song was "You Send Me." On the surface, it wasn't revolutionary. No fiery sermons, no political undertones, no sweeping gospel proclamations, just a simple love song, a declaration wrapped in melody. But when Sam's voice entered, everything changed. He didn't just sing the words, he embodied them, with sincerity so pure it was hypnotic. It was soft, yet strong, vulnerable, yet confident. Every note shimmered with the silk that had once made gospel audiences swoon, but now it was channeled into something universal, the language of love. When "You Send Me" hit the airwaves, it exploded. Within weeks, it toppled Elvis Presley from the top of the Billboard pop charts, holding the #1 position on both the R&B and Hot 100 lists. It sold more than 2 million copies, a staggering figure for a debut secular single from a young black man. For Sam, it wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural detonation. In an era when most black artists were forced to change their names, bleach their sound, or dilute their identity just to be palatable to white audiences, Sam did the unthinkable. He stayed himself. He carried gospel phrasing into pop music, his diction clear but unpolished, his emotions sincere, his dignity intact. He didn't beg for approval, he demanded to be heard. And astonishingly, white America listened. This was not without cost. To his former fans in the gospel community, Sam's crossover was unforgivable. The boy who once sang "Jesus Gave Me Water" was now crooning about romantic desire. The betrayal felt sharp, almost blasphemous, as if Sam had abandoned not just gospel music but God himself. Ministers scolded him, churchgoers whispered, and many turned their backs completely. Sam understood the anger, but he refused to apologize. To him, the soul was not divided between sacred and secular. Love songs and spirituals came from the same well. Both were about longing, both about connection, both about the deepest truths of human life. "You Send Me" wasn't a departure from his soul, it was an extension of it. What followed proved he was no one-hit wonder. Songs like "Only 16," "Everybody Loves to Cha-Cha-Cha," and "Wonderful World" reinforced his knack for reading the emotional temperature of a generation. They weren't always profound in lyrics, but Sam's delivery made the everyday extraordinary. He had a gift for turning light material into something that mattered. His voice could make even a smile sound like a revelation. But Sam wasn't satisfied with being just a singer. He was watching, learning, calculating. He studied contracts while others partied. He examined royalty structures, publishing rights, and the power. He saw how black artists were chewed up and discarded by the industry, their work exploited while executives pocketed the profits. Sam wasn't about to let that happen to him. In 1959, just 2 years after "You Send Me," he founded SAR Records, a label dedicated to elevating young black artists and giving them a chance at ownership. This was unheard of at the time. While most performers were chasing record deals, Sam was building a foundation, thinking like a mogul. He understood instinctively that art without control was just another form of servitude. Still, his crossover success required constant tightrope walking. He was invited onto mainstream television, but told not to speak too much. He could sing love songs, but he couldn't be too political. He could be famous, but never too free. It was a delicate balancing act between acceptance and authenticity, and Sam walked that line with grace. And yet, Every song, whether playful or romantic, carried the DNA of gospel. He sang with conviction, with the quiet urgency of a man who knew music was more than entertainment, it was testimony. "You Send Me" had opened the door, but Sam was already peering further, imagining how far his voice might travel if he refused to bow. The world was beginning to recognize Sam Cooke not just as another black singer who managed to cross over, but as something larger. He was the king of soul, the man who could unite sacred and secular, black dignity and white acceptance, without surrendering himself in the process. The gamble had paid off. Sam Cooke had carved a place in the mainstream without erasing his roots. But even as the applause grew louder, his mind was restless. He knew love songs were just the beginning. Bigger stages awaited him, bigger questions called to him, and bigger battles loomed on the horizon. "You Send Me" wasn't just a hit record. It was a declaration, a signal to America that a new kind of voice had arrived, smooth, uncompromising, and impossible to silence. By the early 1960 seconds, Sam Cooke was no longer a rising star, he was a force. The success of "You Send Me" had opened the gates, and what followed was a streak of hits that cemented him as the king of soul. Songs like "Chain Gang," inspired by the haunting sight of prisoners working on the roadside in Georgia, carried both social awareness and pop appeal. "Cupid," with its playful plea for love, became a timeless favorite, while "Twistin' the Night Away" lit up dance floors across racial lines. Sam had mastered the 3-minute miracle, gospel-rooted vocals, catchy pop structures, and an emotional truth that made his songs resonate far beyond the charts. To the public, Sam was Mr. Sophistication. He was always impeccably dressed, polished, smiling, a man who seemed to carry himself with effortless charm. But behind that veneer was a growing frustration. He could see the cracks in the system. He saw white executives taking larger cuts than the artists who created the music. He saw radio stations preferring white covers of blacks. He noticed how even his mainstream fame came with invisible boundaries, what he could say, where he could go, how far he could push. Yet Sam was never content to play the safe role handed to him. In 1963, he set his sights on the Copacabana in New York City, one of the most prestigious and predominantly white nightclubs in America. The Copa had humbled many great black performers before him, including James Brown. But Sam approached it with poise and strategy. He crafted a set list that blended classics, show tunes, and ballads familiar to white audiences, but he sang them with his own signature style, never losing his soul. The result was a triumph, both artistically and symbolically. Sam had broken another barrier. He was no longer just a black star for black audiences, he was a universal star. Even as he conquered new stages, Sam was building something more enduring than applause. Through SAW Records, he signed and produced artists like the Valentinos, with a young Bobby Womack, the Sims Twins, and Johnny Taylor. He understood the importance of ownership. He controlled the publishing, negotiated licensing, and kept lawyers close to protect his interests. He once even turned down a lucrative deal with Atlantic Records because it required giving up control of his master. For Sam, the goal was not just fame, it was freedom. But that freedom made him dangerous. To some in the music industry, Sam's ambition was unsettling. A well-spoken, independent black man with money, vision, and influence was not the safe, smiling figure they preferred. And Sam wasn't just pursuing business, he was stepping into politics. He was seen alongside Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, not as photo opportunities but as genuine alliances. He began to write songs that leaned more openly into the black experience. The crossover star was becoming a revolution. It was in this climate of mounting tension and hope that Sam wrote the song that would define his legacy, "A Change Is Gonna Come." Unlike his previous hits, this wasn't a breezy pop tune or a danceable number. It was orchestral, haunting, and deeply personal. Inspired by Bob Dylan's "Blowin' in the Wind" and by his own experience of being turned away from a whites-only hotel in Louisiana, the song carried the weight of centuries. Its opening line, "I was born by the river, in a little tent, and just like the river I've been running ever since," wasn't just poetry, it was prophecy. Yet Sam hesitated. The song was so raw, so political, so unlike anything he had released before that he feared the backlash. Would radio stations play it? Would it damage his carefully built image as a crossover star? Would his fans even understand it? For months, he kept it on the shelf, waiting, unsure if the world was ready for his truth. But privately, Sam was convinced this was the music he was meant to make. His earlier hits had brought him fame, but a change is gonna come carried his soul. He poured every ounce of pain and hope into it, creating not just a song but a spiritual cry for justice. Friends who heard it knew it was something extraordinary. Bobby Womack later said that Sam confided, "Man, it's like I'm singing my own death." As 1964 unfolded, Sam stood at the height of his fame and influence. He had conquered the charts, the stage, and the business, but he was also more vulnerable than ever. His music was bolder, his alliances more political, his ambitions larger than what the industry wanted him to be. He wasn't just a pop star anymore. He was a man daring to challenge the rules of race, art, and ownership in America. He didn't know it then, but his greatest song would outlive him. A Change Is Gonna Come would be released only after his death, but it would become the anthem of a movement and the clearest expression of what Sam Cooke truly represented. Hope against despair, dignity against oppression, a quiet certainty that tomorrow could be better. The King of Soul had reached the pinnacle, but the storm was already gathering on the horizon. Success had made Sam Cooke a star, but ambition made him a target. By the early 1960 seconds, he was no longer just the smooth-voiced crooner who crossed over with "You Send Me." He was something the music industry had rarely seen before. A black artist who demanded ownership, who studied contracts line by line, who understood the machinery behind the music, and refused to let it swallow him whole. Sam had watched too many singers, brilliant, beloved voices, cheated by record labels. They recorded hits that made executives rich, while the artists themselves lived in poverty. Royalties disappeared, publishing rights were stolen, and masters were locked away in vaults they would never own. For most, it was simply the way things worked, but Sam refused to accept those terms. He built SAW Records not as a vanity project, but as a lifeline for young black artists who deserved more than. He signed groups like the Valentinos, featuring a teenage Bobby Womack, as well as gospel duos like the Sims Twins and singers such as Johnny Taylor. He gave them contracts that were fairer than anything the majors offered. He made sure they retained rights that others would have stolen. And beyond SAR, he created his own publishing company, CAGS Music, so he could own his catalog. Every time Cupid or Chain Gang played on the radio, Sam got paid, not the executives who had nothing to do with the creation of those songs. This was radical in 1960 seconds America. Black musicians were expected to sing, to smile, to entertain, but never to control. Ownership was reserved for white executives. Sam had not only crossed into that space, he was thriving in it. He turned down lucrative deals, including one with Atlantic Records, because they required surrendering his masters. For Sam, no amount of money was worth losing his freedom. But independence came at a cost. The more power Sam accumulated, the more uncomfortable the industry became. A black man who was charming, handsome, and talented was acceptable. A black man who was wealthy, independent, and unapologetic was dangerous. At the same time, Sam was leaning into politics. He wasn't just making music for the charts, he was beginning to write songs that reflected the black experience. He associated openly with figures like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali. These weren't publicity stunts, they were genuine relationships, rooted in a shared vision of black empowerment. For the white establishment, that was cause for suspicion. For government agencies that monitored civil rights leaders, it was enough to place him under surveillance. Friends noticed changes in him. Sam became more guarded, more careful. He spoke of being watched, of men following him. Some dismissed it as paranoia, but others sensed that he was right. Black power at that level, economic, cultural, and political, was not something America handed over freely. Meanwhile, the tightrope of mainstream fame was becoming harder to walk. Sam could sing love songs on television, but he was told not to speak too much. He could headline shows, but he was warned not to appear too radical. His white fans wanted him to be safe, charming, and non-threatening. But Sam knew his true value went beyond entertainment. He wanted to use his platform to change the rules. That determination fueled his most daring creation, A Change Is Gonna Come. The song, written in the summer of 1964, was unlike anything he had done before. Orchestral, haunting, openly political, It captured the exhaustion of being black in America and the quiet, unshakable belief that justice was possible. Yet Sam, he feared the backlash, worried it might jeopardize his career. Still, in his heart, he knew it was the song that defined him. But even as he prepared to release his most powerful work, the pressures mounted. Industry figures grumbled about his independence. Rivals watched his every move. Whisper campaigns painted him as reckless, too ambitious, too radical. And in the background, surveillance and suspicion shadowed. The man the world saw smiling in tailored suits, charming on stage, crooning love songs that melted barriers, was also a man under immense strain. He was fighting battles few could see, trying to build an empire in a world determined to keep him in chains. Sam Cooke was not simply a star. He was a businessman, a revolutionary in a silk suit, a man who understood that power meant more than applause, but power always invites pushback. And as his star rose higher, the forces determined to stop him began to close in. The stage was set not just for triumph, but for tragedy. The 11th of December, 1964. Sam Cooke was 33 years old, at the height of his fame, and on the verge of stepping into an even more powerful role as both artist and businessman. That night, he checked into the Hacienda Motel in Los Angeles. Just a few hours later, he was dead shot through the chest, half naked, bleeding out on the office floor. The official story came fast, almost too fast. According to police reports, Sam had met a young woman named Elisa Boyer earlier that evening. The two went to the motel together, where Boyer later claimed Sam tried to assault her. She said she escaped with her clothes, ran to the motel's office, and begged the manager, Bertha Franklin, for help. Moments later, Sam burst into the office, demanding to know where Boyer was. Franklin claimed he lunged at her, and in fear for her life, case closed, not charges filed. But nothing about the story ever felt right. Why was Sam found wearing only a sports jacket and one shoe, his pants missing? Why was his money gone? Why did the motel delay calling the police until after the shooting? And why did the LAPD accept Franklin's version of events without conducting a thorough investigation? The coroner's inquest, rushed through in a single hour, accepted the self-defense claim without presenting the deeper inconsistencies. To those who knew Sam, the official narrative was unbelievable. He was no reckless troublemaker. He had just recorded some of the most mature and reflective music of his career. He was a husband, a father, a man with thriving business ventures and a growing political voice. He had plans for his label, for his publishing company, even for a documentary series about black life in America. Why would he throw all of that away in one night of chaos? Friends and fans, some believed Boyer was not simply a frightened woman but part of a setup, a honey trap designed to lure Sam. Others thought Franklin was protecting someone or something that night. Still others whispered that Sam's death was no accident but an execution, a silencing of a black man who had grown too wealthy, too influential, too outspoken. The inconsistencies fed the fire. Sam's body showed bruises and injuries beyond the bullet wound, suggesting a struggle that didn't match the official story. Witness accounts contradicted one another. Yet the press buried the controversy almost as quickly as Sam was buried. For the mainstream media, the story was written, another celebrity undone by fame, women, and violence. But in the black community, the doubts never faded. Sam Cooke's death sent shockwaves across America. He was more than a singer. He was a symbol, a bridge between gospel and pop, a man whose voice had carried both prayer and protest. To lose him under such murky circumstances felt like more than tragedy, it felt like theft. Black America had lost a hero, and the world seemed all too eager to move on. In the days that followed, grief was compounded by suspicion. Fans asked, was Sam set up because he refused to play the industry's game? Was his independence, his ownership of masters, his support of civil rights, his alliances with Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali too much for the establishment to tolerate? Or was it simply a senseless act, the wrong place, the wrong time, a tragic end to a brilliant life? We may never know. The investigation left holes that can never be filled. What is clear is that Sam's death was handled with a haste and carelessness unworthy of his stature. There was no trial, no serious attempt to reconcile the contradictions, no justice for a man who had given so much to music and to his people. Yet even in death, Sam refused to be silenced. The song he had feared to release, the one he thought might be too heavy for his audience, became his eulogy. A Change Is Gonna Come was released in February 1965, just weeks after his burial. Suddenly, his voice rose from beyond the grave, haunting and prophetic. The man who had been denied justice in life gave a cry for justice in song, a cry that would outlast the official reports, the rumors, and the cover-ups. Sam Cooke was gone, but the questions lingered. Was it tragedy, conspiracy, or cover-up? Perhaps all three. What remains certain is that his death was more than an ending. It was the opening of a wound that still aches, a reminder that power, especially black power, is rarely surrendered without resistance. The golden voice of soul had been silenced, but his final song was about to roar louder than ever. Sam Cooke's death was a tragedy, but his voice did not go silent. In fact, it grew louder. The song he had feared was too heavy, too political. A Change Is Gonna Come became released posthumously in February 1965, just weeks after he was laid to rest. The record carried a weight that transcended music. From the opening swell of strings to the weary, aching lines about rivers and struggle, it sounded as if Sam were singing from beyond the grave, a prophet who had already glimpsed his own fate. The impact was immediate. Civil rights marchers in Selma, Montgomery, and Washington carried the song like scripture. Martin Luther King Jr. referenced its lyrics in speeches. Protesters whispered it under their breath as they faced billy clubs and tear gas. For a community exhausted by injustice, Sam's words gave voice to pain and hope in equal measure. He had once been criticized for not being political enough, for focusing on love songs instead of protest anthems. But with this single track, he answered those critics forever. Subtle yet defiant, it became the soundtrack of a generation's struggle for dignity. Over the decades, A Change Is Gonna Come has never lost relevance. Covered by legends such as Otis Redding, Aretha Franklin, Patti LaBelle, and Seal, it has traveled through time as both a lament and a beacon. It appeared in films, documentaries, and even at the inauguration of President Barack Obama. Each time it is sung, Sam's voice echoes through history, a reminder that music can be both beautiful and revolutionary. But Sam's legacy cannot be measured by one's. He was among the first black artists to own his masters, to found both a record label, SAR Records, and a publishing company, Cags Music. At a time when the industry was designed to strip black musicians of their rights, Sam carved out space for independence. That act alone inspired generations of artists to demand more than applause, to demand ownership. The artists he mentored, Johnny Taylor, the Valentinos with Bobby Womack, Billy Preston, carried his influence into their own careers. Others, like Otis Redding and Al Green, openly admitted they shaped their vocal style in his image. Aretha Franklin and James Brown credited him as a model for how to sing with soul. Even the Beatles and Rolling Stones revered him. John Lennon once declared "Bring It On Home to Me" one of the greatest songs of all time, while Bruce Springsteen called Sam Cooke one of the most important singers in the history of music, period. Sam's legacy stretched beyond music into the very structure of stardom. He showed that a black artist could be more than a performer. He could be a businessman, a leader, a symbol of empowerment. He proved that dignity and sophistication could coexist with mass appeal, that gospel roots could flower into universal artistry without losing authenticity. Yet, despite these monumental contributions, his story has often been, while Elvis, the Beatles, and Michael Jackson are household names, Sam Cooke's narrative has been too often reduced to a handful of hits and a scandalous death in a seedy motel. His fight for ownership, his role as a pioneer of black control in the music industry, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death are sometimes glossed over or ignored. In many ways, his legacy has been underrated, overshadowed by the very history he helped to shape. Financially, his death left unanswered questions as well. At the time of his passing, Sam's net worth was estimated around $500,000, equivalent to over $5 million today. Respectable, but nowhere near what his catalog and innovations should have earned him. Without a will, his estate fell into legal disputes. His widow, Barbara, received part of it, but much of what he built slipped away, piece by piece, into corporate hands. RCA gained ownership of some of his recordings, while others changed hands multiple times. For a man who fought so fiercely for ownership, perhaps the greatest injustice was that the empire he created was not fully protected after he was gone. Still, Sam Cooke's true wealth cannot be measured in dollars. It is in every black artist who now owns their masters. It is in every singer who blends gospel fire with pop subtlety. It is in every protester who lifts their voice to sing, "A change is gonna come." His legacy is alive each time his music plays, each time a new generation discovers the silk and steel of his voice. Sam Cooke may have been silenced at 33, but his voice, hopeful, haunting, holy, continues to echo through time, refusing to fade. Sam Cooke's story begins and ends. He was the king of soul, a man whose voice could stir the heavens and soothe the earth, yet his legacy has often been treated as an afterthought. He was a pioneer, a businessman, a civil rights voice in the making, and still, his death was rushed through with little investigation, his influence too often buried under simpler narratives of fame and tragedy. When we remember him today, it is tempting to focus only on the smooth crooner in a perfectly tailored suit, smiling on stage as he delivered love songs that made the world sway. But to stop there would be to silence the truth. Sam Cooke was more than a singer. He was a visionary who demanded ownership in a time when black artists were expected to surrender. He was a man who studied contracts when others looked away, who built a label and publishing company so that the next generation could inherit more than applause. He was a bridge between gospel and pop, between sacred and secular, between the struggle of the black community and the dream of equality. And then there is the song, "A Change is Gonna Come," the haunting prophecy that outlived him, transforming from personal reflection into the anthem of a movement. Sam feared it might end his career. Instead, it became his eternal voice, sung on the front lines of marches, quoted in speeches, echoed in protests decades after his passing. It was as if he had written his own epitaph, leaving behind a melody that spoke not only for him, but for a people yearning to be free. At the time of his death, Sam was worth about $500,000, the equivalent of several million, but wealth measured in numbers pales compared to the riches of influence he left behind. His estate was contested, his empire scattered, his catalog sold off piece by piece, yet his true legacy cannot be bought or sold. It is carried in the music of Otis Redding, Aretha Franklin, Al Green, Bobby Womack, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Bruce Springsteen, artists across genres who look to him as a blueprint. It is carried in every young black musician who now demands control of their masters, standing on the foundation he laid. And so, we must ask, why isn't Sam Cooke remembered alongside Elvis, the Beatles, or Michael Jackson as one of the towering figures of modern music? Why do we celebrate others loudly while his name lingers too quietly? Perhaps because his story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about race, power, exploit. But the truth is this: Sam Cooke deserves his rightful place in the pantheon of legends. He wasn't just a voice of his time, he was a voice for all time. A rebel in a suit, a dreamer who dared to demand more, a prophet whose words and melodies still echo with undiminished power. Sam Cooke may have been silenced in life, but in death, his voice became immortal. Some voices were never meant to fade, and